In the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, a city that still bore the invisible scars of a deeply rooted history of racial injustice, Elijah Turner walked with steady but weary steps toward the neighborhood pharmacy. At 72, Elijah had lived through Jim Crow, marched for civil rights, and raised a family that now spanned 3 generations. His son, Christopher Turner, had risen to the highest office in the land, becoming the President of the United States, a fact that Elijah wore with quiet pride but never spoke of publicly. That day, as he walked down Jefferson Avenue beneath the weight of the southern sun, Elijah had only one intention: to pick up his heart medication from Briar Pharmacy, a simple errand in the neighborhood he had called home for over 40 years. But fate had something far darker in store. As Elijah approached the corner near a well-known gun store, the heavy glass door swung open with force. Out stepped a man in uniform, Officer Bradley Kane, a name known in these parts not for his service, but for his temper. His eyes were cold, his jaw set tight, and in his hand gleamed a newly purchased pair of steel knuckles that caught the afternoon light. Their eyes met only for a moment, just as Elijah brushed past, their shoulders grazing ever so lightly in the narrow space. What should have been a non-event, a moment passed between strangers, suddenly turned violent. With no word spoken, Kane spun around, his fury ignited by nothing more than a perceived slight. Without hesitation, he raised his arm and swung with brutal force. The steel knuckles connected with Elijah's face, the crack of bone and metal reverberating down the street. Elijah crumpled instantly, his head smacking hard against the pavement. His glasses shattered beneath him, blood pooling beneath his silver hair. For a long, breathless second, no one moved. Kane stood above the old man, his lips twisting into a cruel sneer. "Watch yourself, old man," he muttered, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Then, as if nothing had happened, he adjusted his belt and walked away, leaving Elijah lying motionless on the hot concrete. A stunned silence fell over the street before it was broken by the hurried footsteps of Rachel Adams, a young school teacher who had just witnessed the entire attack. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" she cried, dropping to her knees beside Elijah, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone. Her voice trembled as she called 911, relaying the horror she had just witnessed. "He's not moving. He's bleeding. Please, you have to hurry." Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, sirens wailing through the oppressive heat. Paramedics rushed Elijah to St. Margaret's Hospital, while Rachel and another bystander, Victor Hernandez, stood behind, unable to shake the shock of what they had just seen. Victor, a middle-aged store owner with deep roots in the community, clenched his fists as he muttered, "Not this time. We can't let this go." As Elijah lay unconscious in the sterile white hospital room, his body battered and broken, he forced his eyes open with agonizing effort. A nurse named Sophia Jenkins approached, her expression soft but concerned. "Mr. Turner, you're awake. Please try to stay calm." Elijah's cracked lips moved, his voice a whisper. "Call my son," he rasped. "Now." Sophia frowned. "We can contact your family soon, but you need to—" "Elijah Turner," he said firmly, his tone cutting through his pain. "My son is Christopher Turner, the president." The nurse froze. For a moment, she wondered if his injuries were affecting his memory, but the certainty in his eyes made her hesitate. Finally, she handed him the hospital phone. His fingers shook as he dialed the number that only a few had direct access to. When the call connected and the familiar voice answered, Elijah's composure crumbled. "Christopher, it's me," Elijah murmured, his voice tight with emotion. "I was attacked by a cop." On the other end of the line, there was a silence heavier than stone, followed by a dangerous calm. "Where are you, Dad?" the president asked, his tone darkening. "Tell me everything." "St. Margaret's Hospital," Elijah told him. "You need to come." "I'm on my way," Christopher said without hesitation. And then he was gone, already in motion. Within an hour, the President of the United States was en route to Atlanta. His motorcade cut through the streets like a blade, the weight of the nation trailing in its wake. In a limousine, Christopher's mind churned with rage and calculation. He knew that every action he took would be dissected. If he overstepped, his enemies in Congress would accuse him of abusing his power for personal gain. But if he did nothing, he would betray his father and the millions like him who had no voice at all. Arriving at the hospital, Christopher strode through the hallways with barely contained fury. His father's face, bruised and bandaged, twisted his heart into knots. "You don't have to worry," Christopher told him, gripping Elijah's hand. "This isn't going to be buried." "Be careful, son," Elijah whispered. Justice, not vengeance. But Christopher knew the line between the two had never felt thinner. He summoned his most trusted advisor, Mason Carter. "Give me everything on the cop who did this. I want his name, his history, everything." It didn't take long. Officer Bradley Kane. No official record of misconduct, but plenty of whispers. And more troubling still, large sums of money deposited into his account from Titan Shield Security, a private firm already under federal investigation for corruption. "Bring him in," Christopher ordered, "and bring the police chief with him." Chief Warren Blake was a man known for keeping his precinct tightly controlled. Yet under pressure, he cracked. As the investigation unfolded, the rot was exposed. Kane wasn't a lone bad actor. He was part of a unit, a clique of officers covering for one another, taking bribes to ignore crimes, and brutalizing those who couldn't fight back. The connections reached higher than anyone wanted to admit. Even Chief Blake was implicated. In an emergency session with the Department of Justice, Christopher laid down the law. "No one is above the law. Not my father's attacker, not his enablers, not even the police chief." Clean house. It wasn't just about Kane anymore. It was about a system that had been allowed to decay. The backlash was immediate. Police unions decried the investigation as a witch hunt. Opposition politicians accused Christopher of vendetta politics. Protests erupted both for and against the reforms. But Christopher remained steadfast. When Officer Kane was finally brought before the independent commission, he was a shadow of the man who had stood over Elijah that day. Gone was the sneer. In its place, fear. He admitted guilt under questioning, his voice small. But Christopher wasn't satisfied with a confession. "You didn't just attack my father," he told Kane through the video link from the White House. "You attacked the integrity of the system you swore to uphold." The footage of the attack was made public. Millions watched in horror as Kane's brutal assault on an old man played out in chilling detail. The nation was galvanized. Victims from all over stepped forward. Maria Lopez, Jamal Harris, and countless others shared their stories of abuse. The country had reached a breaking point. Christopher acted decisively. An independent oversight commission was formed, with full authority to investigate and reform police departments nationwide. Mandatory training on human rights, ethics, and de-escalation was implemented. Officers with histories of abuse were removed from a force. For Elijah, healing was slow. The scars on his body would fade before the scars on his heart. Yet one evening, as he sat on the White House lawn beside his son, he smiled faintly. "You did what was right," he said. Christopher took his father's hand. "I did it for you," he replied, "but also for everyone else who's ever been left lying in the street." 1 year later, crime reports of police misconduct had dropped by 25%. Communities once fearful of their protectors now cautiously rebuilt trust. Workshops and forums flourished, bridging gaps between law enforcement and the people they served. But Christopher never forgot his father's words. Justice, not vengeance. And when Kane, now stripped of badge and power, asked for forgiveness during his sentencing hearing, Christopher didn't hesitate. "You will face the consequences," he said, "but I forgive you, because I won't let anger define me." The story of Elijah and Christopher Turner became more than a personal tale. It became a movement, a symbol of what it meant to hold power accountable, and what true justice looked like when guided by compassion rather than revenge. In the years that followed, as America wrestled with its own conscience, their story remained a reminder: no one is above the law. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's continue to stand together for justice.